The city of Mbakara was alive that night, streets glowing with lights, music drifting from nearby bars, and the hum of traffic filling the air. Inside a private rooftop restaurant, Aisha Nwoko sat across from her husband, Chike, their table dressed with candles and roses. It was their third wedding anniversary. She wore a red silk dress he had gifted her that morning, and for a moment, she truly believed life was perfect. They laughed, toasted champagne, and shared memories, the city's skyline shining behind them. Then, without warning, the doors burst open. 3 uniformed police officers marched in, their boots heavy on the marble floor. The music stopped. The other diners froze. One officer stepped forward and read out Aisha's name in a firm voice, saying she was under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Aisha's glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. Her heart pounded in her ears. Fraud. She didn't even understand what they were talking about. She turned to Chike, expecting shock, outrage, anything, but he didn't move. He just stood a few feet away, silent, his face unreadable. As the officers pulled her up and handcuffed her, Aisha's eyes locked on him. That was when she saw it, the faint curl of his lips. He was smirking. Her mind went blank. No words came, only the sharp pain of betrayal slicing through her chest. Later, as the police car sped away and the city lights blurred outside, her voice would echo in her own head. I thought prison would break me, but it built the weapon I'd use to destroy him. The ride to Kumba Women's Prison felt like a nightmare Aisha couldn't wake up from. The walls appeared first, tall, cracked, and stained with years of weather and stories no one wanted to tell. The gates groaned open like they were swallowing her whole. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of sweat, damp clothes, and something sour that clung to the back of her throat. The guards barely looked at her as they shoved her forward. The women stared, some with curiosity, some with hunger, some with the cold, flat eyes of people who had seen too much. Aisha clutched her thin prison blanket like a shield, trying not to show fear. But fear was there, running under her skin like electricity. Her first night was a blur of noise, shouting, the clang of cell doors, the scrape of metal trays. She learned quickly that in Kumba, kindness was a luxury no one could afford. One inmate offered her a seat, then demanded half her bread in return. Another accidentally spilled water on her bed, forcing her to sleep on the damp floor. Aisha didn't fight back. Not yet. It was on her 3rd day that she met Mama Zuri. The older woman sat in a quiet corner of the yard, her hair silver, her eyes sharp as a blade. She called Aisha over with a simple wave, the kind that made it clear she wasn't asking, she was summoning. You're walking like prey, Mama Zuri said, her voice deep and steady. If you don't fix that, they'll eat you alive. She handed Aisha a small piece of bread. No one gives you anything here for free. Except me. Because I see something in you. From that day on, Mama Zuri became her anchor. She taught Aisha how to read the room before speaking, how to hide her anger until the right moment, and how to make allies without making promises she couldn't keep. She explained which guards could be bribed and which ones would sell your secrets for a cigarette. Every lesson was wrapped in a warning. Never show all your cards, and never fight unless you know you'll win. At night, lying on her thin mattress, Aisha replayed the moment in the restaurant, Chike's smirk, the cold in his eyes. She thought about Linda, her former best friend, and wondered if she had been part of it. The questions burned in her chest. One thing became clear. She wouldn't just survive this place. She would come out sharper, stronger, and ready to make them pay. The prison walls might have been built to keep her in, but inside those walls, something else was being built too. A heart of steel and a mind full of plan. And Aisha swore to herself, in a whisper only the darkness could hear, that the man who put her here would regret every second of it. It was another slow, sweltering afternoon in Kumba Women's Prison when the truth found Aisha. She was sitting in the dusty yard, pretending to stitch a torn prison shirt, when Mama Zuri's shadow fell over her. Without a word, Mama Zuri slipped something into her lap, a folded newspaper, edges frayed, the ink smudged in places. Don't let the guards see, she murmured, then walked away. Aisha's hands trembled as she opened it. The front page wasn't what caught her. It was the small business column buried inside. There it was in black and white. Chike Nwoko, respected businessman, takes full control of Nwoko cocoa exports after wife declared mentally unstable. She read it again, slowly, each word slicing into her like glass. Declared mentally unstable. The words looked ugly on the page, but she could almost hear his voice saying them with that calm, polished tone he used for the press. And her father's company, the one he built from nothing, the one she inherited when he passed, was now Chike's. Just like that. Her stomach twisted, but she kept reading. The next paragraph made her freeze. The businessman is now engaged to socialite Linda Okafor. Linda. Her Linda. The friend who once sat on her bed eating mangoes and laughing about silly boys. The friend who cried with her when her father died. The friend who promised she'd always be on her side. Aisha's vision blurred. For a moment, she wasn't in the prison yard anymore. She was back at her wedding, watching Linda dance and toast to Aisha and Chike's forever. She felt sick. She folded the paper carefully, tucking it under her shirt before the guards could notice. But inside, her thoughts were no longer careful. They were wild, sharp, and burning. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. That night, in the dim cell, Aisha lay on her back staring at the cracked ceiling. She could hear the snores of the other women, the occasional cough, the distant clang of metal gates. But her mind was far away, already imagining Chike's face when everything he built on her ruin came crashing down. Mama Zuri had once told her, "Revenge is like fire. Burn too fast and you'll get nothing but smoke. Let it burn slow, and it will cook your enemies." So Aisha began to think, not about escape, that would come later, but about building a plan from inside these walls. She started noticing which inmates had visitors who could be trusted, which guards looked the other way for the right price, which scraps of news slipped in with the laundry. Chike thought locking her away would silence her. Linda probably thought the same. But as Aisha lay there in the dark, her rage was no longer just a feeling, it was a weapon taking shape. And one day, she promised herself, they would both feel it cut deep. At first, Aisha kept to herself, watching and learning. But slowly, she began to notice something. Many of the women around her had cases that were messy and unfair. Some couldn't read the legal papers they were given. Others didn't even know how to file an appeal. Aisha had studied business and law basics in university. She could write a formal letter without blinking. One afternoon, when a young inmate named Beezy sat crying over a rejection notice from the court, Aisha asked to see the papers. She read them, fixed the mistakes, and wrote a new appeal in neat handwriting. A few weeks later, Beezy got a reply. Her case was being reviewed again. Word spread quickly. Soon, women started coming to her quietly, handing over crumpled sheets of paper, begging for help. Aisha never charged money. Instead, she asked for information. Who owed who? Which guards could be bribed? Who had family outside willing to run errands? She collected these pieces like puzzle parts, storing them in her mind. The more she helped, the more protected she became. Women who once tried to bully her now nodded respectfully when she passed. Some even saved her food from the kitchen, or kept her name out of trouble when fights broke out. In return, they taught her things she'd never have learned on the outside. How to pass a message without words, how to hide a note inside a loaf of bread, how to make a deal with someone without shaking hands. Mama Zuri watched it all with a half-smile. One evening, as they sat in the corner of the yard eating beans from dented bowls, she said, "You're building something, but don't let the power get to your head. In here, trust is like gold, rare and dangerous." She leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. Revenge is best served cold and with proof. Proof is the blade you'll need when it's time to cut. Aisha took those words to heart. She started trading in the prison's black market, not for cigarettes or food, but for favors. A guard's cousin needed help with a visa application. She drafted it in exchange for an extra hour in the library. An older inmate wanted letters sent to her lawyer. Aisha agreed, if the woman's nephew would dig up old records from a court in Lagos. Every deal brought her one step closer to understanding how information moved in and out of Kumba. She never forgot why she was doing it. Every time she wrote an appeal, she imagined writing her own, the one that would tear Chike's world apart. Every time she traded a favor, she pictured trading the final blow that would ruin him. The prison walls were still there, tall and unforgiving, but inside those walls, Aisha was no longer just surviving. She was weaving a net, strand by strand, and one day, that net would tighten around the man who thought she would break. It happened on a rainy evening, the kind where the prison walls felt colder than usual. Aisha was in the laundry room, folding a pile of uniforms, when Officer Kalu walked in. He was one of those guards everyone avoided, not because he was cruel, but because he was dangerous in a different way. His uniform was always too neat, his smile too smooth. He had a reputation for making deals that could either save you or sink you. He leaned against the doorway, watching her work. "You're smart," he said casually. "Smarter than most here. And smart people, they don't have to rot in here for nothing." Aisha kept folding, pretending not to care. "What do you want?" she asked. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I have money coming in from outside. Small amounts. Too small to get noticed if moved right. I need someone who can make the paperwork look clean. In return, I can get your letters to certain people who can't be reached through normal prison channels." It was a dangerous offer, and they both knew it. If the wrong person found out, she could end up in a deeper hole than the one she was already in. But this wasn't just about sending letters. This was about opening a door. Aisha didn't hesitate for long. "I want the first letter to go to Barrister F. Ajayi," she said. "No one else touches it. No copies. No questions." Kalu smirked. "You've got yourself a deal." Over the next few weeks, they worked quietly. Kalu passed her bits of paperwork, fake receipts, made-up invoices, and she used her neat handwriting and sharp mind to make them look real. In exchange, he slipped her envelopes and blank paper. Every letter she wrote to F was short and careful, each one layered with enough polite legal talk to pass inspection if open, but with coded phrases only F would understand. F had been her family's lawyer since she was a child. He was the one who handled her father's will, the one she trusted more than anyone outside those walls. She knew if anyone could dig into Chike's empire and find the truth, it was him. One afternoon, Kalu returned from his shift with a faint smile. "Your lawyer's good," he whispered. "He sent something back, says he's on it." That night, Aisha lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, she felt the air in her chest lighten just a little. Somewhere out there, F was pulling at threads Chike didn't even know were loose. Somewhere, the first cracks were forming in the empire that had been built on her ruin. Aisha closed her eyes, a slow smile creeping onto her face. She had no way of knowing exactly what F would find, but she knew this. The game had finally started. And this time, she wasn't playing alone. The news came on a humid afternoon, nearly a year after she'd first sent word to F. Aisha was in the prison library, sorting old law books, when Officer Kalu appeared in the doorway. He didn't speak at first, just tossed a folded piece of paper onto the table. "From your friend," he said before walking away. Her hands shook as she opened it. F's handwriting was neat, but the words inside hit like a hammer. "I have proof. Chike forged signatures, bribed court officials, and created false accounts in your name. He orchestrated your arrest to seize the company. He now uses profits to fund political allies in Cross River State. It's bigger than we thought." Aisha read it twice, then a third time, each word burning deeper. She could see it now. The smug press conferences, the handshakes with politicians, the expensive suits paid for with money that should have been hers. Her father's company wasn't just stolen. It was being used as a weapon to make Chike untouchable. For a long moment, she just sat there, the paper pressed flat on the table, the library silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. She thought of her father, a man who had worked in the cocoa fields as a boy, who had built the business with his bare hand. She thought of how proud he'd been to leave it to her. And now, Chike had turned it into his personal bank, his ticket into the pockets of powerful men. Her first instinct was rage, a burning, blinding heat that made her want to scream. But Mama Zuri's voice rose in her mind, steady and sharp. Revenge is best served cold and with proof. This was the proof, but it wasn't enough to wave in his face. Not yet. If she moved too soon, he could bury it, buy more allies, twist the story until she looked guilty all over again. No, if she was going to take him down, she had to do more than expose him. She had to destroy him. That night, she sat on her bunk, the letter hidden in her waistband, and made a decision. She would strip Chike of everything, his company, his reputation, his allies, his pride. She wouldn't just take back what was hers. She would make sure he had nothing left to rebuild with. She began to map it out in her head. How to gather more evidence, how to plant stories in the right ears, how to use every prison connection she'd built to reach the people who could help her strike when the time came. In the dark, with the sounds of snores and distant footsteps around her, Aisha felt a strange calm settle over her. The truth had finally come to her, and now it was her turn to decide what to do with it. Chike thought he had ended her, but he had just armed her instead. The news came without warning. It was a hot afternoon, the kind where the air in Kumba prison felt like it was sticking to her skin. A guard called her name from the cell door, his tone flat, like it was just another routine task. "Pack your things. You're leaving." For a moment, Aisha thought she'd misheard. People didn't just leave Kumba. They served their time, or they died inside those walls. She stared at him, waiting for a smirk, a joke, anything that would tell her this was a cruel prank. But he just repeated it. "You're free." Her heart thudded hard in her chest. No explanation. No warning. No chance to ask why. She gathered her few possessions, a faded blanket, a worn notebook filled with plans, a pen Mama Zuri had once smuggled to her. Each item felt heavier than it looked, for years of her life were packed into her arms. Before stepping out, she went to find Mama Zuri. The older woman was sitting in her usual spot in the yard, her hands busy shelling groundnuts. She didn't look surprised. "I told you," Mama Zuri said, her voice calm. "Your time here wasn't to break you. It was to make you." She reached up, her eyes locking on Aisha's. "You walk out a queen or a beggar. Choose." Aisha swallowed hard. "A queen," she whispered. The gates groaned open. She stepped out into the world thinner than the woman who had walked in, her skin darker from the sun, her eyes sharper. The wind on her face felt strange, almost unfamiliar. She didn't smile. Freedom wasn't a gift, it was a tool, and she knew how to use it now. The road outside was dusty and empty, but to Aisha, it looked like a battlefield waiting to be claimed. She didn't have money, power, or even a safe place to sleep that night. But she carried something far more dangerous: patience, knowledge, and a mind trained to see weaknesses in every structure. As she walked away from Kumba, she didn't look back. Those walls had taken 4 years from her, but they had given her something in return: the armor she would need to wage her war. The sound of the gates closing behind her echoed in her ears, like the final note of a song she'd been forced to listen to for too long. Somewhere, far away, Chike was living in comfort, believing she was gone from his life forever. He had no idea she was already coming for him. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of gold and red. Aisha lifted her chin and kept walking, every step measured, every thought focused. She was no longer the woman who had been dragged from a dinner table in shock. She was the woman who had survived hell and walked out wearing its crown. Port Harcourt was nothing like Mbakara. The air was heavy with the smell of the docks, salt, oil, and fresh cargo. Ships came and went at all hours, and the markets buzzed with traders shouting prices. It was here that Aisha chose to begin again. Not with her real name, of course. She became Amara Daniels, a quiet, determined businesswoman with no past anyone could trace. Her prison connections were her first investors: a former inmate whose brother owned trucks, another whose cousin worked in customs, a guard who owed her a favor and slipped her paperwork she shouldn't have had. Piece by piece, she built a small cocoa export company, modest at first, but clean, efficient, and hungry for business. Aisha didn't go after Chike directly, not yet. She started by studying his client list, memorizing the names of buyers from Europe and the Middle East. Then she made her move. She approached them quietly, offering slightly better prices and faster delivery time. She kept her promises, even if it meant long nights at the docks, checking shipments herself. Within months, a few of Chike's smaller clients had switched to her. He didn't notice at first, but she knew he would. While her business grew, she began another kind of work, the kind that didn't show on paper. She started passing small but damaging pieces of information to journalists she trusted. A late shipment here, a rumor about unpaid workers there. Nothing big enough to make him suspicious at first, but enough to plant seeds of doubt in the market. When one of his containers was seized by customs for missing paperwork, a delay Aisha had quietly arranged, the news hit the local business pages. Chike brushed it off publicly, but she knew his pride was wounded. Aisha didn't gloat. She didn't rush. This was war played at the pace of chess, not checkers. Every client she took was another brick pulled from his empire. Every rumor she spread was a crack in his perfect image. At night, in her small but tidy apartment, she would sit with her notebook, reviewing the day's gain. Some days it was just one small contract signed. Other days it was a whispered confirmation from a dock worker about Chike's latest shipment. She wrote it all down. The key was patience. Chike had built his influence on money and image. If she could drain both without him realizing how, he would collapse from the inside. Months passed, and her company began to be talked about in trade circles. Amara Daniels was praised for reliability, fairness, and fast service. Everything Chike used to be known for. Aisha knew the mask would eventually fall from his face, and when it did, she would be ready to show the world the man behind it. It started like a slow leak in a pipe, one drop at a time. A late shipment, a customs fine, a quiet rumor about missing funds. Then all at once the pipe burst. One morning, the front page of the Daily Watch carried the headline: "Top businessman linked to bribery scandal." The article named Chike directly, outlining shady payments to government officials in exchange for trade favors. The evidence was solid: copies of transactions, statements from anonymous sources. Aisha smiled when she saw it. She knew exactly where those copies had come from. Within weeks, other stories followed. Workers at his warehouses came forward about unpaid wages. An old supplier revealed he'd been cheated out of a year's earnings. Every story chipped away at his image as a respected businessman. Politicians who once shook his hand in public stopped taking his calls. Invitations to elite events quietly disappeared. The worst blow, for him, came from his personal life. Linda's family, already wary of his scandals, dug deeper and found his growing debts. Debts he had hidden under layers of fake accounts. The engagement ended overnight. Linda moved abroad, and the society pages wrote about it like it was a breakup in a soap opera. But Aisha wasn't finished. She had been waiting for the perfect moment to drop the final weapon. F had helped her prepare. The truth about the forged documents that sent her to prison. The court hearing was quiet but tense. Aisha sat calmly beside F as he laid out everything: forged signatures, fake witness statements, bribed court clerks. The evidence was so detailed, so undeniable, that the judge barely needed time to deliberate. The verdict was clear: Aisha was innocent. Chike had framed her to steal the company. The judgment hit like a thunderclap. The court awarded her full ownership of her father's cocoa export business, and a massive sum in damages for the years she had lost. Chike didn't even look at her as the decision was read. He just stared at the table, his hands clenched, his face pale. Outside, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed, microphones pushed forward, questions flying. Aisha gave them a short, measured statement. Justice took its time, but it came. Then she stepped into her car, leaving them shouting behind. By the end of that week, Chike's accounts were frozen. His business contracts were canceled. Friends he'd known for decades vanished. He was no longer the powerful man who had smirked while she was dragged away in handcuffs. He was just another name in the paper, a fallen man everyone pretended they had never supported. And Aisha? She was finally holding what had always been hers, with the city watching to see what she would do next. The gates of the mansion creaked as they swung open. The gardens were overgrown, the fountain dry, the place stripped of the shine it once had. Aisha stepped inside, her heels clicking against the marble floor that used to host glittering parties. Now the air smelled of dust and emptiness. She found him in the living room, sitting in the dark. The curtains were drawn, the furniture covered in sheets, the grand chandelier above them gathering cobweb. Chike didn't move when she entered. He looked thinner, his suit worn, his eyes hollow. The man who once stood with power in every step now sat like a shadow of himself. Aisha didn't rush. She walked slowly, every step a reminder of how far she had come. She stopped in front of him, meeting his empty gaze. Her voice was calm, steady, without an ounce of pity. "You took my freedom," she said softly. "I took your world." For a moment, silence filled the room. Chike blinked, as if trying to find words, but nothing came. She turned and began to walk away, her head high. Behind her, the sound of his shallow breathing filled the space. The camera, if there had been one, would have stayed on his face, watching the moment he finally understood what it meant to lose everything. As the front doors closed behind her, Aisha's voice lingered in the air, strong and certain. "Justice tastes sweeter than cocoa."